All right, all right. I hope everybody's doing well, and welcome to the Constructive House channel, where we do make sure we bring original stories to light, and we have our docu series where we do break down lending discrimination, where we do break down your home buying toolkits, and we do. Hold on, let me X that out there. All right. I hope I can be heard. Can be heard. Hold on. Let me do an audio check real quick. All right. I hope I can be heard. Can be heard. Hold on. All right. Looks like everything's good. So, yes, like I said, welcome to the Constructive House channel. I do appreciate you all and all the support and subscribers we've been getting on our YouTube. Looking to also grow the Rumble channel as well. But we do break down original stories from your different Black Wall Streets. And we break down how the Homeowners Loan Corporation implemented their residential security maps back in 1933, headed by Franklin Roosevelt, the president at the time, as a part of his New Deal, where it was more or less confusion by illusion, where the illusion was given that there would be mortgage relief for home buyers if you needed your loan extended, modified. At the time, mortgages were 5 to 10 years, so they were extending it through the help of the FHA. They would do loan modification programs, so you go from having a 5-year mortgage or 10-year, and that would actually get extended to a 15 or 25-year mortgage, which was unheard of at the time. But what it would do is lower the monthly payment for homeowners who were struggling during the Great Depression time. It would lower their payments. That way it could stimulate the economy, because now they're able to put money towards other things and people activities throughout life, so that helps out with economics as far as supply and demand. Now, as opposed to you slaving away just to pay the mortgage, you can put some of that money back into your local economies, which will in return generate the federal economy and, of course, the global economy based on how things were at the time, because a lot of folks were foreclosing, losing property, losing homes. So the government came up with a program called the New Deal. But however, the confusion by illusion was that the New Deal was to help give relief, but the relief, as we later found out, was only given to those who were not in the red line area on those maps. And they drew the maps with the red lines and said that, hey, anybody in red is hazardous. And what a coincidence that those that were in red happen to be black citizens. So you have to be very aware of that was a targeted agenda, so much so that the HOLC was terminated because of these practices. So you have to be aware of that. So although I do a lot on mortgage and home buying tips, because we are looking to build a constructive household for everyone. So I do look at that, but I also go over the history, so you do know what's going on. I also break down where you can look at to where you can report any lending discrimination, any unfair treatments, any equal credit opportunity violations, any fair housing violations, whether that be renting or home owning. You actually have that right to go in and report that if you're getting discriminated on, if you're receiving any unbalanced treatment when you're going to get a home, if you feel that you were denied or your appraisal wasn't adequate, because those were parts of the things that happened with the Homeowners Loan Corporation. They got together with appraisers, realtors, loan officers to help create the maps, which ultimately lowered appraisals in any area that was deemed hazardous to the point to where they couldn't buy or sell unless they had cash. And the values of the homes were so low, and because of them saying it was a hazard zone or a slum zone or it was blighted, that they actually had to just leave the house where it was. And we're talking about cities from coast to coast that were labeled hazardous but had millionaire mansions in them, like Sugar Hill in Jacksonville, millionaire mansions. They lowered it so much, the values that is, lowered it so much till you got to a point where they're leaving their homes. They wouldn't insure the homes. They wouldn't appraise the homes. You couldn't get any renovation relief. You couldn't take cash out to do any repairs, even though you too were struggling, that you had to leave and forfeit your home that you may have purchased at that time for $5,000, $10,000, and now it's worth $100. So they're leaving and migrating elsewhere. That's why there has been a lot of Blacks that have migrated all over due to practices like this. And that was really the foundation of what is now gentrification. And then as you leave and the area does become blighted, where first it wasn't, now they can make room for the freeways that they put in all the Black communities, the super freeways. And on Overtown, we talk about how I-95 and I-395 ran through it, just like in Jacksonville with I-95 running through Jacksonville, and 8th Street being pretty much reconstructed, as they called it, but it was urban removal. And they move everybody out to make way for the freeway, to make way for now what you see is the Jaguar Stadium, Everbank Field. Same in Miami, same. Every city has a Black Wall Street story. So it's not just Tulsa. I know that's what we're always pushed, because that was the first act of more or less terrorism in this country, domestic terrorism, where people were dropping dynamite sticks on citizens in Oklahoma. So it was a very tragic story, and it doesn't get enough light brought to it. But I'm only letting it be known that there were Black Wall Streets coast to coast. These maps were created in every city, and they were drawn a residential map, a red line. I'm sorry, they drew a red line on the residential security maps. I call them redlining maps, to pinpoint where each Black community was at. They wanted to pinpoint where they were at, and that's where they put the hazardous waste plants, the mills, anything that they could run through to stop all that progression. Because we're talking about 30 years removed from slavery, and folks are becoming millionaires. Like I talk about Abraham Lincoln Lewis becoming a millionaire right out of Florida, running the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. Now, I know we are going to be recapping the Legacy Lost docuseries that I have on YouTube for Overtown as well as Savannah. But I did want to bring light on that as well in Jacksonville. And Dana Dorsey, a millionaire out of Miami. We're talking about people who had millions of dollars in the early 1900s, just after the Civil War, and were able to build themselves up. So when you hear folks say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we've done that. That's been done. We don't have a culture of toxic waste. We have a legacy of inventors, of politicians, of businessmen, entrepreneurs, bankers, insurance companies, agencies, from the South all the way to California, that Black Americans have done this. So it's not that we're just sitting waiting for a paycheck. As you can see, and I'll be showing and demonstrating, there were targeted agendas to prevent the progress, because there was no way that Blacks fresh out of slavery could rebuild communities when they were given nothing. Like one I'm working on now in Tampa, the Scrub, where they were left to the palmetto scrub thicket to build their own properties. And they built it up, and it became another hub for a theater. It became a hub for banking. It became a hub for all sorts of commerce in the area. And when I go back, well, let's go ahead and break down redlining, because there is some questions. I've even seen some of the comments on my other channel about redlining being about voting. Redlining voting can play a role in it, but it was about mortgage and real estate. It dealt with banking and finance, insurance. They wouldn't lend to you because you had been deemed hazardous, like you see on this map here. Let me blow it all the way, like you see on the map here. The 1968 Fair Housing Act outlawed racially motivated redlining and tasked federal financial regulators, including the Federal Reserve, with enforcement of it. Okay, so yeah, voting was like a trickle-down effect, but as you see, financial regulators. So it was about finance, banking and finance, because that's the bread and butter. That's how you generate generational wealth. It's through home ownership, property ownership, land ownership. So when they take that away from you, that extends that wealth gap between the quote unquote races, because there's the human race and then there's just folks who practice racism, you know. So I try to make sure I'm on the other side of that, and it's just the human race. Like I don't subject myself to any sort of classing up of people. I am about balance between all people. Everyone should have the same access, balance between all people, guaranteeing that those that need the most help are in fact getting the most help. And as we see here, Blacks have been on the back burner when it comes to those that are needing the most help. So much so that they are outlawing and banning these types of acts, because this has been going on for far too long now. Far too long. Just far too long. So this is redlining. These are some of the maps that they created. So here you see Miami, and you see where all the red is. All right. These were the Black communities. We went over Overtown. Overtown is right in here. All right. And all of these were other Black communities that were redlined. So they can put the freeway through there, 95, I-95 and I-395, and whatever they wanted, because they said it was needed. They said it was needed, that we had to kick you out of where you're at. We got to lower your values. There was no balanced exchange of compensation for these activities. It was not balanced. It was not balanced at all. Some were not even given a dime, but they had to lose their home that they built from the ground up. And then today you look in these areas and these neighborhoods and you say, look, Black folks just didn't even know what to do. Look at them. Look at what they're living like. And that wasn't the case back in the early 1900s. That wasn't the case all the way until like the 60s. The 50s and the 60s is when that started happening, due to redlining practices, due to the Homeowners Loan Corporation, not due to lazy Blacks not wanting to pull themselves up by their bootstrap. That is nonsense. And we're here to start making sure we shape the narrative correctly and not just go off of what people are saying. And then you go outside and you look and you're like, oh yeah, it must have always been like this. No, these were targeted agendas as to why it's like this. And here is proof right here, a map showing you right now. There's a map legend. I'll see if I can pull up a bigger one for you, but they're showing you right here. This is where they created this. This map is super old. It's old. Okay. Let's see if I got another one. Now, these are how they were grading them. Like I said, green was labeled best, and that was what they classified middle to upper income. Desirable, declining, and then hazardous in red. All right. Desirable or still desirable was blue, declining was yellow, and then hazardous was red. But it was very interesting that the ones in red were coincidentally the Black communities, but also at the same exact time, these areas had millionaires in it, mansions in it, plenty of commerce in it. Most, like Durham, North Carolina, had banks in it, insurance companies in it. Savannah, Georgia, where we went over, Frogtown and Yamacraw, had banks there, insurance companies like the Guarantee Insurance Company. Like the Wage Earners Savings and Loan, the Wage Earners Bank. They had banks, 2- and 3-story buildings in their area, in these neighborhoods. Commerce going on. It wasn't blighted at all. The maps, this legend right here is how it became blighted. They lowered and it wasn't just residential. They lowered the values on commercial property. So now your business isn't worth anything. They lowered the values on all the homes. And if you know the behind the scenes when it comes to like mortgage lending, if the insurance companies are saying, hey, this home is no longer worth this business is no longer worth that amount, and the bank like Wage Earners, they're the ones who are taking the loans out, but now they have to go buy the houses back because they're foreclosing. But they can't even buy them back for what they issued the loan amount out for. They can't even buy it back for what they issued out the loan amount. Imagine you have 1,000 people who all had, and we're just talking about in the early 1900s, who had $5,000 to $10,000 mortgages on their property, and now they're only worth $500 or $100, and the bank has to buy that back. That bank will eventually have to shut down. They have to shut down, and these are things that would shut these banks down, and ultimately shut down the insurance companies. It would also be shutting down the whole community. Now it is blighted because everyone has had to move, relocate, go elsewhere, and they have to leave their properties where they are or accept less than favorable compensation for a property that was way more than that. But now they're run down. So now they have a great excuse to run I-95 through there. They have a great excuse to run I-16 through Savannah. They have a great excuse for that now. And this is all due to the HOLC redlining maps. Okay, so make no mistake, here's a redlining map of Savannah, where they targeted Savannah. And we're going to be going city to city, but they targeted Savannah with their redlining maps and encourage appraisers and realtors to no longer lend in any area labeled hazardous, which is red. As you can see right here, this is red. It's a little faint. This is an older map. It's from 1929, as you can see down below, 1929. All right, but this is where a lot of lending discrimination, this is where it started. This is where it started. See, the government took notice that there were a lot of prominent communities. They took notice and created these maps here that you can see. All right, they took notice. And this was where they started to extend or expand that economic wealth gap from right here. This is the foundation of it. All right. So just so you can be caught up to speed on the Homeowners Loan Corporation, but the Homeowners Loan Corporation was a government-sponsored corporation created as a part of the New Deal. The corporation was established in 1933 by the Homeowners Loan Corporation Act under the leadership of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Its purpose was to refinance home mortgages currently in default to prevent foreclosure, as well as to expand home buying opportunities, like I mentioned earlier. That's what it's about when you want to stimulate the economy. You got to lower housing for folks so they can spend money in other areas of activity. That's how you're going to stimulate the economy. That's how you do it. All right. Because the biggest bill that majority Americans have in their household is on the cost of living, whether it be your rent or your mortgage. That's going to be your larger bill. The rest will be smaller than that. So if you can lower their largest bill, they'll have more freed up funds to invest into the local economies and ultimately the larger economy. So that was the agenda. However, while doing that, simultaneously, they were targeting the Black communities at the time as well. That's why I call it confusion by illusion. So you have to be aware of that. So it's even documented here as far as how they originated redlining. The HOLC is often cited as the originator of mortgage redlining. Mortgage redlining, for some that wanted to add correction, which I don't mind being corrected, but redlining wasn't voting redlining. This is about mortgage redlining. All right. The HOLC maps generated during the 1930s to assess credit worthiness were color-coded by mortgage security risk, with majority African-American areas disproportionately likely to be marked in red, indicating designation as hazardous. These maps were made as part of the HOLC City Survey project that ran from late 1935 until 1940. Perhaps ironically, HOLC had issued refinancing loans to African-American homeowners in its initial rescue phase before it started making its redlining maps, which, you know, that can be debatable. The racist attitudes and languages found in the HOLC's appraisal sheets and residential security maps created by the HOLC gave federal support to real estate practices that helped segregate American housing throughout the 20th century. Segregated it. All right. So I just wanted to make sure we are aware as far as that part before we go into it. I always want to make sure that we have a good enough backstory and we're focused on what we need to be focused on so we can build constructive housing. All right. But make no mistake about it, man. These were targeted practices. And we go over in my Behind the Lines docuseries as well as how it's still going on today. Like I did the docuseries on Ameris Bank, and I have several others that will be coming out here pretty soon. I will also be having a case file, the Redlining case file. I will be dropping that in so you guys can purchase that in your home buyer's toolkit so you know what questions to ask and how to be prepared. I feel that I'll more than likely give that one away for free, and I'll make sure it's very inexpensive for the Redlining case files, because I do want you all to be able to see the investigative details and outcomes and practices that are going on, and that the Department of Justice has been taking several banks to court behind still continuing the practice that's been outlawed since 1968. And they're still taking them to court now. And they're still settling out of court and being punished for doing racial discrimination in lending. It's still going on today. I did a series on Ameris Bank, and there's several others. So that way, and I also put in the case files how you can actually go out and report this and hold them accountable, because there's a lot of these settlements that are saying that they're supposed to be hiring a certain amount of people of color. They're supposed to be marketing to a certain amount, putting branches in a certain amount, giving education and funds to these neighborhoods that they redline. So we got to make sure that we stay on top of that, and that they're actually doing what they agreed to settle and not just pay to make it go away. Because I can assure you, some of the stuff that's going on in there is so heinous and so disgusting and so non-constructive that they didn't even put it in the court paperwork. Now, as we saw with Fairway Independent Mortgage, they're in there using racial slurs, emailing to each other. Despicable behavior. Despicable behavior. Non-professional and super non-constructive. But as we go back over our recap, because I do want to make sure we're going over the recap, but I would have to always make sure we're on the same page as well, as far as why behind what we're doing. And the why behind it is we want to ensure that you are up to speed to build a constructive house. Every household that we're sowing seeds in, I want to have a constructive household. Understand how to generate generational income. Understand the whys behind home ownership. The why behind if you're approved or denied for a mortgage, the why behind commercial real estate, commercial loans, investment homes. So I want you to have that understanding and also be equipped with knowing your history behind it, knowing that, hey, there's been targeted attacks. So if you're not aware, history will repeat itself again. So you have to be aware of that. The maps were created, and there are banks today that are still using these maps to make sure they do not market or lend to areas, people in those areas that are still predominantly Black today. So we got to make sure we're aware of that so we know how to be equipped. But yeah, I'll probably be putting out the case files. So you guys will have this information at your fingertips whenever you need. It'll be called the Redlining case files. It'll probably be coming out in a week or so, and you'll be able to download that for a couple bucks, maybe $5 at the most, just to, just so you are able to see what's going on currently. And I'll probably do it as a volume-based series, so there'll be several volumes that come out. So that way you can see exactly what's going on in your area now, how to report and hold people accountable for it, and what happened. Because I'm sure with all the cities that have been, or all the companies that have been taken to the Department of Justice and settled, I'm sure your city will be in the case file, the investigative case files that I have. And you can see the investigation details and everything on it. But I'll make sure it's very concise, constructive, short and to the point. I'm working on it now, so you guys will be able to purchase that here very soon. All right. But going back to Overtown, out there in Miami, and you'll notice a trend when it comes to all the different Black Wall Streets. But in Miami, just like in Jacksonville, just like in Atlanta, just like in Savannah, just like in everywhere you'll see, it all centers around the railroads. Okay, the railroads is what was the driving force for building these Black Wall Streets. It's the railroads. All right, I'm going to make sure we're on the same page here. A lot of emancipated Blacks went down to Miami for Henry Plant's Railroad. I believe it was the Florida East Coast Railroad, and then you got Henry Plant's Railroad as well. But they would migrate to get working on the railroads. And a lot of blacks picked up, and this is city to city. They picked up on, hey, if passengers are going to be stopping in these towns, let's open up some shops. And they started out as just opening up, street vendor type shops. So we can capitalize on them getting off the train, selling them some food, essentials, toothbrush, things to, cosmetics, hygiene products, clothing, shoes, water. Next thing you know, it started as them just doing street vending to opening up buildings, stores. And before you know it, they have a neighborhood that is a black epicenter. And it started off the railroads because they weren't able to live where they had to work. So they take the money that they were working on the railroads, and others, there were some families where the husband may be working on the railroad and the wife is out there selling cosmetics, selling hygiene products, maybe clothes, sometimes food, sandwiches, barbecue, you name it. They're right at all of the stops for the railroad. They're selling their products, bringing that back to their community, buying more things. But it all started with the railroad. You'll notice that same pattern going on. And Miami and Overtown was no different. It started right at the railroad, right at the railroad. Matter of fact, let me see if I can pull up Overtown, Miami, and see the different railroads at the time. But that's everywhere. It started at the railroad. And next thing you know, they're building a whole community. And like I said, the government took notice. It was like, oh, no, we got to put a stop to some of this. How'd y'all figure that out? And the way many of them figured out how to do it was they were taught in the church. The church would teach a lot of emancipated blacks. That was your place of refuge, was the black church at the time. That was the place of refuge in Overtown. That was a place of refuge in Jacksonville. That was a place of refuge in Savannah. And I can go city to city to city. You would go to the church. The church would provide you food, clothing, and shelter because the government was not in any state of mind to help out any emancipated blacks. It's like, go fend for yourself. They go to the church and get educated because a lot of pastors during slavery, some taught themselves and some were taught from their slave owners how to read and write the Bible, how to read the Bible, how to write their notes and things along those lines. So they would be taught how to do that. And they started teaching others, especially when they became free. So now they're able to start catching up. They understand about commerce. They understand how to read and write. So now they're not getting as bamboozled as much as they thought they would be able to trick them when it came to like putting something in their face and saying sign here. And they're like, no, I'm not signing that, man. I can read. And they're like, how you know how to read? But that was an education hub, the church. The church was that education hub. It was a political hub as well. It was education and political hub, and it helped. It got a lot of blacks jump started and on their feet. That was also where they would network to let you know, hey, you can go on this street, you can go down this street. We're working on the railroad too. You can get a job at the railroad. Your wife can go do X, Y, and Z on Broad Street out there in not Overtown, but out there in Frogtown. Because Frogtown heavily with the Central of Georgia railway system, heavily had many blacks that set up shops over there. And they built up Broad Street. They built up Yamacraw from all of that business they were getting. Next thing you know, they got banks like the Wage Earner Savings Bank, which doesn't get as much pub as it should get. So let's break that down. Let's take a look here. The Wage Earner Savings Bank. Because I do want you all to kind of see some, but I would like you to still go check out the documentary. All right, hold on. All right, so this was a letterhead, and their president was Lucius Williams, L. Williams. But this is a wage earner savings bank. All right, at the time they had Alice and West Broad Streets is the corners they were on, but this is in Savannah, Georgia, early 1900s. Capital $50,000. Early 1900s. The bank already was having a capital of $50,000. Resources was over $1 million. Look at that. Look at that. And this was the building. This was the building. It later became the Guarantee Insurance Building, and now it's the Civil Rights Building now as a museum in Savannah. Right there on Broad Street today. You can go check it out. I'll probably do a stream from there at some point. But you can go check it out. It's still standing today. This building, built in the early 1900s. Descendants of slaves built this because they were pulling themselves up by their bootstraps because they were equipped with the information on how supply and demand worked. And they found a demand and they were able to bring a supply to them, which was the banks. They found that and brought it to them so they can get a piece of that home ownership. And then you have agencies like the HOLC that went out of their way to destroy this. And let me see if I can pull up the letter they sent to W.E.B. Du Bois. Let me see if I have access to that. Because I saw where they were communicating with W.E.B. Du Bois on supporting him and his movement at the time, which is very a very interesting find to me. Because these are things that they don't teach you in school. These are things you didn't learn about. I've never heard about the Wage Earner Savings Bank in school. Never. All these Black History Months that I've gone over, I've never heard about any different Black Wall Streets. They were in towns you may have never heard of, and towns that you have, like Birmingham, Alabama, like Savannah with Yamacraw and Frogtown. You hear little churmurs here and there, but they weren't doing any sort of like lesson plan centered around this. Not at all, not even close. So these are things that I try to help bring awareness to so we can have that balance between people. Because I do feel that that's what's key. And yeah, right here, you see? To Mr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Look at that. We beg to advise that Mr. Williams has suffered oh, wow. And they were in communication. This is the letterhead, 1927. Nearly 100 years ago. And look how professional these Black people were. Look at this. So you don't ever let anybody tell you that you come from some culture of toxic, ne'er-do-well type behavior. Like, that's not the culture. That's a small segment that is in every culture, not just in the Black community. Every culture has criminals. Every culture has people who don't do as much as they should. Every culture has that. So you don't let that be the driving force behind yours because people tell you that, because it's promoted. Those are all targeted attacks that they're promoting, that we never did stuff like this. Like, we don't have the capability. I mean, there's times where I hear even Black folks say we've never had our own stuff. We never had our own bank. This was the one right here in Savannah, Georgia, off Broad Street, where Frogtown is at. Right here. Right here. Savannah, Georgia, 1927. So our culture goes back, way back, doing stuff before there was a Jay-Z or a 50 Cent. We had millionaires way back in the day. They're not new. And it wasn't just Madam C.J. Walker. We had plenty of them. Plenty of them. Here's Savannah right here, front and center. And like I mentioned, and I believe it's in the thumbnail, Dana A. Dorsey, millionaire out of Miami, Overtown. Dana A. Dorsey, Miami's first Black millionaire. Heavily involved, politically influencing, investing in all sorts of real estate. Dorsey, Dana A. Dorsey. a black millionaire. Like, we're going to start putting some respect on these names. We're going to put some respect on these names. Let me see if I can share a brief little snippet here. Let me see if I can share my screen. I just want to share this tab, just so we can break down Mr. Dorsey, because I'm just, we're recapping, kind of catching up. I haven't done a live stream in a few weeks now, so I do want to recap that. A couple of docuseries that I've put out so folks can understand and we can debrief, kind of unpack it in the comment section, if you will. But Dana Albert Dorsey is often described as Miami's first black millionaire through his constant reinvestment of his rental income into building more rental property. He was able to be a key player in providing for a new library that would be named after him. All right. Born in 1872. And was investing in rental properties in the early 1900s. Okay. So this isn't some like, oh man, one off. Like I said, Abraham Lincoln Lewis did it in Jacksonville. Florida had it cracking. Georgia had it cracking. North Carolina had it cracking. All the way to Los Angeles. Because another common theme you'll see is in a lot of these black epicenters, Central Avenue. You'll see that as a common theme more and more and more. Even in California, we have South Central. They're now just calling it South LA, because Central Avenue was what the black epicenters called their main street, was Central. That's why you have South Central Los Angeles. They're letting you know that that's the black community. Same in Overtown, same in Frogtown. Central Ave lights up at night. That was Main Street in the black community. They called it Central Avenue. Almost everywhere. And we're talking about communities they built. This wasn't something that someone gave them the name to. They made that name up for themselves. And as you see, Dana Dorsey right here. But how many times during Black History Month growing up have we heard about Dana Dorsey? We'll hear, about slavery and then Martin Luther King and then, maybe Harriet Tubman stories or two. And we're on to the next. We're talking about the Pilgrims. Like they don't put any focus on people like Dana Dorsey, who was a real estate tycoon in the early 1900s. Real estate tycoon. We don't put any emphasis on that. We don't put any respect on his name. No respects on his name. None. Let's go through some of this. As you see the timeline here. Forced to sell Fisher Island. I mean, wildness. Here's his library right here. Wildness, man. Wildness. Overtown is they are doing a lot to try to revitalize it. Of course, we want to stay on top of that and make sure that it is, going to create balance between all people, and that those that are needing the most help will get it, and that it's not another trick bag play, like the residential security maps, like the HOLC with the confusion by illusion. You got to make sure that that trick bag isn't coming back around. Because they got banks out down in Miami. They got redlining cases on them too, including in Overtown neighborhoods and Little Haiti and all of them, including them. They got them going on right now, settling in court right now. So you got to make sure you're on top of that, because we can't just assume because, they're making efforts to revitalize. You got to make sure that it's still keeping the best interest of those who are needing the most help, because they still haven't made right for taking all those homes and devaluing the properties on residential and commercial properties down in any of the black epicenters that they deemed hazardous or blighted or slums or ghetto, as they would use in the 70s and 80s. They haven't righted that. They haven't righted that at all. Matter of fact, they're still practicing it. We saw it in Mayor's Bank. Still practicing it. Fairway, the mortgage firm Inc., who did that in Miami. And I believe their case was settled this year. Like, it's still going on, using the same maps from the 30s. They're using it in 2025, almost 100 years later. So you can report on the news you're doing some good stuff, but it's on us to hold their feet to the fire to ensure they're still doing what they claim they're going to do, and not this confusion by illusion technique that the HOLC did, that we see it has been going on and been going on and been going on. That's what's been going on. There hasn't been proper, adequate relief that's been going on. There hasn't been adequate housing, adequate compensation. None of these things have happened. But no one has any problem saying pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, newsflash, blacks have been doing that and are still doing that. And no matter how hard you try to push on social media, the news, with music, that we're this class of toxic waste, that's just so far from the truth. And there's too many receipts out there to prove that that's incorrect. And I'll tell you this right here real quick. If they really thought, and by they, I mean anyone in that dominant force, that elite supremacy type of category, if they thought that we were that toxic, they wouldn't go out of their way. They wouldn't go out of their way making maps. They have no need for that. Not for useless people. It's because you're useful. They wouldn't go through maps. They wouldn't go through racism. They wouldn't do any of those things if they felt that you were just useless bums. They wouldn't need to do all of that for a class of people who are nobodies. They're going through all that because there's too many somebodies in these areas. That's why. You don't create targeted agendas for useless people. They're useless. You can move them out of the way with no problem. But when you start going through different arms and extensions of government to create stuff to suppress people, it's because they're useful, not because they're useless. That's the whole reason. So you got to keep that in mind too, okay? So we don't want to be lost in that, but we want to make sure that we're on the right path when it comes to that. And being aware of your history is where you start. But like I said, millionaires in the early 1900s from Black communities were all over. It wasn't just Madam C.J. Walker. It wasn't just a couple of people. They were all over. And like I said, the railroads is where it got started at. It was from the railroads and other infrastructures as well. But one of the big draws was being able to work on the railroads, and from there be able to build commerce around the passenger terminals. Now you got restaurants there. Now you got clothing shops, tailors, barbers. Eventually banks and insurance companies. Banks and insurance companies. All right. So like, don't let anyone give you that jazz, that jive, that nonsense that blacks came out of slavery and we just been figuring out how to flush the toilet since the late 1800s. Like, don't fall for that. That's nonsense. That's garbage. It's not true. Okay, so we're not going to go there. We're not going to play around with nothing like that. That's silly talk. But just getting into Overtown, I want to get a little more into, we're just debriefing. We're talking, we're kicking knowledge, man. It's not really like overly formal. Okay, but when it comes to central avenues, we want to make sure we're on top of that, because you'll see that trend. When you see that, you know in your mind, hey, this was more than likely a black city. Pull your phone out and look it up and be like, what black neighborhood was in Central Ave in Durham? Central Ave and Overtown. What black neighborhood was this? They'll start pulling up for you. You'll see it. You'll see it, because it's every city. Every city had one. It wasn't just this one or that one. It was every city. They were all over the place. Okay, so make no mistake about that. They were all over the place. It wasn't just this place or that place. All right, so keep that in mind. But Overtown had so much going on as far as in the theater, in the arts, the jazz scene, the Chitlin circuit. Like, it was a lot going on there. It was a lot going on. And a lot of the black performers would perform for white crowds and white theaters. And they would have to stay somewhere else because they couldn't stay in those hotels in those neighborhoods. So they would go to Overtown and they would give them performances for free. So much so that it became a Chitlin circuit stop. You know, Ray Charles performed there. Ella Fitzgerald performed there. Lena Horne. I mean, the biggest names you could think of would be in Little Overtown at the time. And if they had cameras and things along those lines, I'm sure we'd have so much more footage. But Sam Cooke performed his live at Overtown or live at the Harlem Theater. Like they built all kind of theaters over there, and not just Overtown. Even in Savannah, they had theaters they had built. The Star Theater in Savannah, where they built where they would have the same type of thing going on. They showed movies. You know, they would have the double features, cowboy flicks, and the whole nine, man. Like we're talking about in the early 1900s. We're not talking about a few years ago, a couple of decades ago. We're talking about nearly 100 years ago. The 30s, the 40s. Talking about like a long time from. Hold on. We're talking about 80 plus years ago. All the way from the early 30s to the 60s when they started really cracking down that whip on redlining. We're talking about a long time. So the legacy is being found. All right, they tried to hide it, but it's being found because you can't hide it that good unless you take away your own history. So we're still here. We're still doing things. And I just wanted to make sure we are bringing awareness to those who need awareness brought to them. That's why the docuseries is out. All right. So keep that in mind, you know, but I don't want it to get lost on how Blacks capitalize on the railways, how they capitalize on entertainment and theater, because there's 9 areas of people activity. And at that time, whether they were you know, super consciously thinking of it, or if it was subconscious, they were capitalizing on all those areas, your economic area of activity, your education area of activity, your entertainment area of activity. Because you're doing one of these 9 areas, if not one or more, throughout life every day. Like everything you do will fall into one or more of these areas: education, entertainment, labor, economics, law, politics, religion. You fall into all of these areas. War. So you have to make sure you're aware of that. And they were capitalizing on these areas, especially in the economics, politics, and religion, using the church as the education hub, to where in Savannah, they were able to build the Georgia State Industrial College for Colored Youth, which is now Savannah State University. They built the Georgia State Industrial College for Colored Youth. That was based on the church. First African Church made that push. And now they had a place where you could learn a trade. You can and learn how to run a business. They were doing that in the early 1900s, and that institution is still alive and living and kicking today. It's called Savannah State. The Beach Institute was another one. Although it was founded by whites at the time, it was a school for people of color. And it was where they were able to get educated. So you could go out and work at these pharmacies, like Central Pharmacy in Savannah, right on Central Ave, Central Pharmacy. That's what it's called, Central Pharmacy. It was a sister store to the Savannah Pharmacy, which, if I'm not mistaken, was bought from the Lee Chemical Company out there in Albany, Georgia. So blacks were involved in pharmacy, medical. In Savannah, you had the Savannah Pharmacy that shut down, I believe, in the early 2000s. You had the Central Avenue Pharmacy, which was a sister operation off of that one. There's not a whole lot of footage about it, but you can read up about it if you look at it. But the Savannah pharmacy was huge. It was a huge pharmacy, and blacks had been involving themselves in science since the beginning of time. So this isn't something that's new. The Savannah pharmacy was big, right there on Broad Street. And anytime that you can't find any sort of like information or pictures or just awareness, you can go into the Sanborn insurance maps, and they'll show you the directory and where these places were. And you'll see some of them were black businesses. But Sanborn maps has that because they were mapping all the insurance places, everywhere where they were getting insurance. So they needed maps to know, okay, these people are on Broad Street. This is the businesses. This is where it's residential. This is where it's a city. And they're going through the whole thing. And the maps will show you. They won't have detailed like photographs, but you'll see the sketches of the map, the legend, everything. And from there, you can build more research from there. But you do want to be aware that the theater and the entertainment sector, blacks capitalized on that with vaudeville acts, with motion pictures at the time. So a lot of them were silent films in the early 1900s, but motion pictures, the Chitlin Circuit performances, we're charging and building that income, taking it back to the communities. Like blacks were very self-sufficient at this time, especially in Savannah, where they built black banks, pharmacies, restaurants, tailors, insurance companies. And all of that started from the hub at the church. The church was an education hub for them. And from there, they built educational institutions. Educational institutions. Like we got to be real about that. Richard Wright was a spearhead for the Georgia State Industrial College, which was an amazing college. Let me see if I can pull up a picture of them real quick, so you can kind of see that. I know it was in the docu-series, but it doesn't bring it enough justice to not just unpack and break that down as well, because we're talking about legacy here. Georgia State Industrial College for Colored Youth. It's still at HBCU today. It started as an HBCU, and it still is one right now. Like, that's a blessing. That's amazing. So let's take a look, and let me see if I can find, I'll see if I can get a few photos up in here on it. Let's see. Hold on. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention the Carnegie Colored Library, the East Henry Street Library. That was the first library that the Carnegie library system, public library system, did a black library. They gave them $12,000 to fund a library for blacks at the time, because black folks were segregated from going to any white libraries. And Carnegie actually gave them a loan, or a grant rather, I'm sorry. And they were able to build a library on East Henry Street. And it was a part of the Carnegie Colored Library, or the East Henry Street Library, in Savannah, Georgia. It's still standing now as more or less a museum type monument. I don't believe they have any like library activities going on right now. But I was trying to find. Let's see. I believe this is it here. Yeah, so here's one of the pictures of the Georgia State Industrial College at the time. Let me see if I can get a couple of others. Let's see. Can you see? Georgia State Industrial College. And it, of course, has to let you know it's a colored college. But this is now Savannah State University. This was spearheaded by First African Baptist Church, which may be the oldest church, black church in the United States. It was a church started during slavery. And when blacks were emancipated, a lot would migrate to Savannah. They were in like neighboring cities, sometimes neighboring states, and they could get refuge there from the church. They get food, clothing, shelter, jobs, and education to learn how to actually be self-sustaining. And it started at the church. But as you see right here, Georgia State Industrial College for colored folks. And this is now Savannah State University, but this is way back in the way back in the day. Spearheaded by Richard Wright. Richard Wright. Let me see if I can pull him up too, so you can get it. Yeah, let's see. There's an older picture of Richard Wright. This man went to college in his 60s. In 67, he went to college to learn more. Like he was almost 70 years old, but he never stopped learning, and no one should stop learning. But that's a huge testament to him. Let me see if I can grab another. I'm going to grab one for more at the time. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah. And thank y'all for rocking with me, man. Let me see if I can grab this real quick. All right. And right here, that's him in the center, holding the hat. Front row. That's him right there. All right. And this was his trustees of the Georgia State Industrial College for Colored Youth. And their whole agenda was to build an institution where blacks could learn a trade. They also were involved in liberal arts, but they were helping you learn a trade, learn entrepreneurship, learn how to be self-sustaining. They taught farming and agriculture. That was big. That was huge at the time, was farming and agriculture. In fact, I believe that I have a painting picture there for that as well, where they taught farming and agriculture. Yeah. So as you see right here, there's a model farmhouse, but they were out here teaching them how to grow crops, how to farm, how to be self-sustaining back then. As you see, we come in with receipts to break down these things, but they were taught how to be self-sustaining, how to learn what they're doing when it comes to agriculture and how you could use that. Now you're able to sell your fruit and vegetables to markets on Broad Street in Yamacraw, and you can also sell them to restaurants that are serving food. Now they got farms. If they're serving ribs, now you know how to manufacture that, run a pig farm and get that out there, a cow farm, the whole nine. They were showing them these things in the early 1900s. This is early 1900 work right here, okay? This isn't in the 60s. This isn't in the 70s. This is way back in the day. All right, so we're going to put to bed and lay to rest this blacks need to pick themselves up by the bootstrap. No, we've already been doing that. We still do it. We've been doing it. That's nothing new to us. You're not bringing any new news to us by saying that. All you're doing is making a mockery of us, tar and feathering us. So these are things that's been going on for a long time. In Yamacraw and Central and Broad Streets in Frogtown, they're one of many that's been going on. But to see the black excellence, to be able to run your own bank, teach infrastructure, teach educating, teach science, so you can know how to develop and run a pharmacy. It's amazing. It's amazing. And more light should be brought to these things, especially with Savannah and especially with Overtown. But I want to make sure that it is clear that these things started from the railways. It started in the church. All right. It started in the railways and the church. The church was educating The railways provided opportunities for jobs. And then from those jobs, it created more opportunities for businesses to build around that and take that money from the passengers into their community so they can generate a black epicenter. And those were happening everywhere because the railways were going coast to coast at the time. So every city was being able to build up around that. And they were taking advantage of that. So you got to make sure you're aware of that, capitalizing on those opportunities, which is what was done in Savannah and Frogtown and Yamacraw. That was done there. The Yamacraw Market, all these things were them setting up shops around the Central of Georgia Railway passenger terminal. Savannah's Union Station. That's where they set these things up at Union Station. They set these up at the terminals, the passenger terminals for the Central of Georgia. At Henry Plant Railway, the Florida East Coast Railway, all their terminals, their Union Station. They're setting up shops around that, street markets. That stuff you see today where folks are trying to sell you CDs, flowers, all that stuff in the front. They've been doing that since back then. And they would elevate their game from being a street vendor to now I'm selling in a business and I got a brick and mortar store. Now we got a franchise like Abraham Lincoln Lewis in Florida. He started with Afro-American Life. Next thing you know, that's in Savannah. Next thing you know, that's in Atlanta, Tampa, and so forth, franchising it out. First black millionaire in Florida, Abraham Lincoln Lewis. Bought American Beach. Right there in Nassau County. Real estate tycoon as well. That's what you call pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. When you were denied access to be able to go into white beaches, to be able to go into any white storefronts, to be able to get any insurance or banking lending from white establishments, we created our own. That's what the wage earners is about. That's what Carver State Bank, which is still here in Savannah today, Carver State Bank, started right after wage earners, and it's still here today in Savannah. Today, it's still running. Wage earners is not still running, but those are examples of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and getting it done when you were told no. And other examples of stopping that is the HOLC's residential security maps. That was them stopping it. That wasn't them helping bring support. Because the going thing is pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it yourself. But then you got folks getting in the way. Now, what do you suggest be done to stop that? Which they're making efforts, it appears. But we got to make sure it's not confusion by illusion as well, because making efforts to fix something, but then we've seen this story where you made efforts with the New Deal, then we found out that we were getting bit in the butt by it. And that it wasn't ever intended for us. So we got to make sure that these aren't things that are still taking place. Because, yeah, you're saying you're extending the olive branch, but we've heard this before. So give us the solution on how to hold you accountable. No more pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps when we've been doing it, still doing it. Give me some solutions on how to hold you accountable for what you're saying you're going to do. We got to make sure there's checks and balances, just like the branches of government do. We got to make sure the checks and balances are there. And that you're not just telling us something in order to shoo us away and say, see, we're doing stuff for you. Now get out of here. No, you've done stuff to us. So you're not doing anything for us. You're just fixing the problem you created. And we got to make sure that's understood. That has to be understood. That was a problem created, not something that we created. So if you spill milk in my house, you're telling me I got to go pull myself up and clean up after you. No, clean up after yourself. Clean up after yourself. Yamacraw, Frogtown, Overtown, they were cleaning up after themselves and still being attacked and targeted. Just like over in Rosewood, just like in Tulsa, still being attacked, and they were picking themselves up by their bootstraps. They were. So this isn't a matter of debate. You know, like I said, Dana Dorsey, real estate tycoon, first black millionaire in Miami. Right there in Overtown, real estate tycoon, millionaire. Overtown has such a rich legacy. That's why I do encourage you all to go check out the stream on it, on the Legacy Lost stream I did on Overtown. I want you all to check that out because there's a lot of rich history there. Like I said, a lot of great artists performed there. Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Theater. An amazing one. It was nicknamed Harlem of the South. Tampa was as well. That's where Ray Charles wrote his first, one of his first songs. But Overtown, rich history. And it's centered around the railways, Florida East Coast Railway, Henry Plant's railway system. It's centered around that, building all the shops and street vendors right there at the passenger terminals at Union Station. They did that in Savannah. They did that in Jacksonville. They did that in Miami, Overtown. They did that in Tampa. Like that was an agenda that we had in order to get out of there, and that came from the foundations of the church, educating free blacks. Like that's where that came from. So don't ever, like, I know these days the black church may be different than at those times, but know that it was the support from the black church that built these black Wall Streets that you highly hold in high regard, that you speak so highly of. They got their funding, their footing, their foundation from the black church. Pretty much all of them. That's how they were being educated. That's how they were being funded, because blacks weren't able to get a loan from the bank right out of slavery. They weren't able to get insurance. They weren't able to do these things. So they created mutual aid societies through the church. The church is what helped open the doors into getting into politics, support of your neighborhoods. That came from mutual aid societies. That came from the church. Same with insurance. Mutual aid societies aren't spoken enough of. Am I a big fan of like fraternities and things along those lines? Not really. But I am always a fan of anything that's going to ensure that those that need the most help indeed get the most constructive help. And that's what they were doing. So I can't ever be upset. I can't knock that. When you're creating a society that's there to support the burial of people's loved ones, like they were doing out in Savannah with their mutual aid societies, like they did in Overtown. And they would create societies that would support, and everybody would put a few cents a week in the bucket to make sure that someone transitioned on, that they could have a proper ceremony, that they could be accounted for, insured on, because they weren't given the opportunity to get insurance from any white insurance agencies. They could just tell you no and get out of here. Same with the libraries, same with the medical. Best believe in medical. Same with medicine. You couldn't get a prescription from any white institutions, and that's why they came in Savannah. They built this Savannah pharmacy and the Central Pharmacy. These were black-owned pharmacies at the time, and there are others. Same with the hotels. You were barred from going to any other hotels. You got performers that can perform at the Copacabana, but they can't stay around the corner or in that hotel, even though they're performing at the theater or in the ballroom of the hotel. They couldn't stay there. But they can go elsewhere and stay wherever, just not there. But they can perform for you, though. That they can do, but staying there, no, that they can't do. Oh, no. So it's just those types of things. And I just wanted to do like a brief recap on it. I'll be breaking it down a little bit more, but I just wanted to kind of touch base on these things because it's stuff that we need to be discussing. Because I mean, I could go line by line and it'd take me a whole year and I still would have more to bring to the table. I'll just be honest with you. I have more and more and more to bring to the table. But today I just kind of wanted to recap these last two docuseries and just kind of break down some of the things that can get lost in transition. But I do hope that this was found to be constructive and that you all do stay tuned in on Legacy Lost, Behind the Lines, and Money Heist Files, as I'll be putting out those episodes through the Constructive House channel, which, like I said, is there to build constructive houses. I want you all to have a constructive house from head to toe in all areas of activity. And always, always remember, those that need the most help should get the most constructive help.